Good morning, welcome to my channel. You might be curious about my own accent, how I came to speak as I do. I was born in Nottingham in the East Midlands. It's generally thought of as a Midlands accent that they speak in Nottingham, although you can hear it's got some similarity with how people speak in South Yorkshire as well. People in Nottingham are famous for calling each other Duke and using such words as twitchell and mardy. I consider Nottingham to be my native accent, and I do slip into a Nottingham accent occasionally. Not on these videos, of course. My parents, they speak in a Nottingham accent generally, although you can hear other influences on their speech as they've lived in lots of different places before. When I was 4 years old, my family moved to Bradford, where we lived for a few months. Not very long, but long enough for me to pick up a Yorkshire accent. And then we moved to Somerset and Bridgewater. And while we were there was a lady who didn't like me playing with her little boy. She was a bit worried that her son might pick up a northern accent from me. We spent 7 years in Somerset, and I'm not really sure whether I ever developed a Somerset accent while I was there, but I did start to sound very posh while I was living in Bridgewater. I think that's probably down to the influence of some of the teachers that I had in school. Some of them were possibly a little bit posh. Certainly not for my parents, because they don't really sound posh. Also, probably watching old movies might have given me an RP accent. Watching Dad's Army, I liked that program quite a lot when I was a kid, and there are some RP accents, particularly that of Sergeant Wilson. And when I was 9 years old, I started watching classic Doctor Who, and I heard an awful lot of posh accents watching that, and I think that was a very formative influence on my accent, as I've said before, watching classic Doctor Who. When I was 11, my family moved to Worcester in Worcestershire. They have a really interesting accent in Worcestershire. You can hear the influence of Birmingham and the West Midlands on how people speak in Worcester, but there's also a bit of a West Country sound to it. I'm very thankful that I never really developed that accent, as I rather dislike it. Apologies to anybody who's watching this who lives in Worcester or Worcestershire. I think Worcester's an absolutely beautiful city. I think Worcestershire's an absolutely beautiful county. And I probably feel that Worcester is my home much more than Nottingham. Nevertheless, I do dislike that accent, the sound of it. Okay. Um, so I continued sounding quite posh while I was living in Worcester and Worcestershire, and occasionally I got teased a bit about it by people. Not that that bothered me at all. And then I went to university in North Yorkshire, where once again I developed a bit of a Yorkshire accent. But it was maybe slightly refined. I still sounded a little bit posh, even though I was using some Yorkshire pronunciations in my speech. I think I probably sounded a little bit like William Hague, who was the Tory leader at that time. I think that gradually faded out once I moved back to Worcestershire. Um, these days, I live in Hertfordshire in Stevenage, and sometimes I do pick up a slightly Londonish southern way of speaking. I think my accent's become a little bit more refined in recent years because I'm a massive fan of The Crown series on Netflix, and I think that's probably maybe brought my accent up a bit, so it's become even more heightened. I definitely recommend watching The Crown, especially if you're watching this channel and your intention is to develop a posh accent. What I can't do is speak in what's often called contemporary RP or Southern Standard English. Maybe sometimes I sound like that as a result of hearing other people speaking that way. It's probably quite a lot where I live who speak in sort of Southern Standard middle class English. But if I try to sound a little bit less posh than I normally would, then my accent tends to move back to its native roots in the Midlands and Nottingham. So I can't really do a kind of not quite so posh, toned down, southern standard middle class accent. That's just not something I just can't speak that way consciously. I do find that the Nottingham accent does tend to reassert itself in my speech sometimes. So sometimes I will end up saying bath rather than bath, or path rather than path. And I particularly struggle with the schwa sound sometimes, so I end up saying pub rather than pub. And then I'll be on the phone to somebody, I'll be speaking really posh, and then at the end of the conversation, I'll say, thank you very much. It just sort of reasserts itself. But generally, I do sound as I do on these videos with heightened received pronunciation. Okay. So if you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and please consider subscribing or turning on notifications so you don't miss any more videos, don't miss any content. Okay, have a fantastic weekend.